we are joined today by Ruth. Is it last name Harper?
Yes.
Yes. Yay, I got it right. It's an easy enough name, right? I should totally know. And I am so excited to have her on today. So just give us a little bit of your background, Ruth. Tell us some things about you, how you grew up, where you grew up, and where you are now.
Yeah. So I grew up in the Pacific Northwest, kind of like rural area, like, but close to Seattle. Yeah, I grew up in a like a stay-at-home like situation. Like my mom was a stay-at-home mom, and it was kind of like expected that I would do the same thing. And now I work as an attorney. So that's what.
Oh, that's very cool. Yeah. Okay, so take us back to when you are growing up. Are you told that you should not pursue a career? Are you told that you should pursue a career? How did that conversation go?
Yeah, so funny thing, like there were a little bit of like two different points of view. My mom was a stay-at-home mom, and it's something that she had wanted to do like for all of her life. And so from her, I heard a lot of this is the way, like this is ideal, this is great, this is like what you should pursue. And then from my dad, I didn't really hear that. He was just silent, which is
Okay.
more atypical in like this sort of like structure. So he didn't push me one way or another, but it was sort of like, well, you know what, it's your choice. But my mom definitely was the one that said, like this is something that, you should like do.
Okay. Okay. So tell me a little bit about your religious background of your mom. Was this something she just told you, you should do this because I did this and this was so great? Or was it more of you should do this, and if you don't do this, this is wrong?
Yeah. So a little bit of family background here. I'm so we joked that my last name's Harper. My former last name was Apahidian. And
Wow, wait, what?
I know
Apahidian?
so that's actually an ethnically Romanian name. So it's Eastern
Oh,
Europe.
cool. Yeah. Yeah.
And my mom, so both my parents were born there. And they were both raised in Pentecostal households.
Hmm.
It's Romanian Pentecostal, so there is a difference between a lot of the mainstream Pentecostal churches here in the US versus those, but they essentially still have the same roots. And then fast
Okay.
forward, they met in LA. Sorry, they came to the United States, they met in LA. And then yeah, they moved up here. Why I mentioned the fact that my mom and dad are Romanian is because I look at like a combination of both religious and what they saw. So my mom reacted to her mom. So
Okay.
was one of nine kids, and my mom was, and
Wow.
so large
Mhm.
family. And so her mom was never at home. Like both her parents worked. So after they
Okay.
came back from school, there's no one there except like her older siblings, like, and her
Hmm.
older sister was like a second mom almost. And so my mom like saw what growing up in the 60s in Eastern Europe, she didn't like what she saw. And
Sure.
and so she like really wanted to, I think, make up for that. And so you take her that context and background, and then fast forward to when I'm around like 8 or 9. They've My parents have moved on from like a Romanian Pentecostal church, but then they started
Okay.
to different churches and came across this homeschooling movement. And
Oh, sure. Okay.
that was their introduction. So I was homeschooled in like when I was like second grade, I think. And
Hmm.
it was and then that opened up a whole nother like world because it combined like homeschooling plus religion plus a lot of these values. So
Okay. Okay. So for people who maybe are like, oh, hey, I homeschool or I know homeschoolers, and like, what are you talking about that's different from just people who homeschool and, like you said, the homeschool movement? Were there people in specific because I know there's some of the big name people, especially I don't know what era you were in, but like the 1990s kind of homeschool movement, there was some really big name people that others followed. Did you guys have a specific brand of homeschooling that you preferred over another?
We didn't like, we were more like the independent homeschooling type. And I was homeschooled in the late 90s to kind of give you an idea.
Okay,
Um,
sure.
yeah, so we didn't. I guess, yeah, sorry, I lost track of the question.
No, it's okay. So explain to someone that doesn't know like what homeschooling was like back then. Explain to them how it was.
Oh yeah. Okay. So the um homeschooling now is I think more mainstream, is
Mhm.
accepted. You have like online tools, online programs. When homeschooling was popular, like when it first came out in like, 25 years ago, or not for, well, for me, when it was new, but it was new in the fact that only like fringe groups homeschooled. It was
Sure.
the, not to stereotype here, but a lot of like the long skirts and oatmeal cookies sort of situation, where,
Right.
and I'm not trying to stereotype, but it was a lot of those more rural, more conservative families who were trying to react to public schools and what children were being taught then. It was more, I look at it as a reaction than a like, oh, this is a different way of doing things. I think it was a lot more
Sure.
polarized, I would say, than it is perhaps now. Because now we have,
Okay.
there's charter schools, there's different ways of teaching other than just a full-time public school or full-time homeschooling.
Right, right. Okay. So for somebody who has not heard the term stay-at-home daughter, or maybe has heard the term, but it's like, I don't know what that is. I don't know what that means. How would you define a stay-at-home daughter?
A stay-at-home daughter is a young woman who falls underneath her family's umbrella and stays in that setting until she is married, and then moves into her husband's house and falls under his umbrella. It's sort of like this, like covering, like this kind of. That's why I'm using the term umbrella. It's because
Right.
of this covering, this like household you're a part of.
Sure. So would it be okay for a stay-at-home daughter to say move out and go get an apartment on her own?
Yeah, no, well, there's, because that situation wouldn't be okay because, she doesn't fall underneath either like her husband's authority or her father's. But
Okay.
yeah, hence
Right.
daughter would be father.
Sure, sure. So very much like you stay here under your father and then you move to under your husband.
Yeah, correct.
Okay, okay. Um, so I would like to talk a little bit about when you reached kind of the teenage age. Were you allowed to get like a driver's license, a job? How did that conversation go down?
I got my driver's license when I was 18, but I didn't drive prior to, I think, a few months prior to turning 18. I didn't go to driver's
Okay,
school. So it was, it wasn't like really late, but still I think it was a lot later than maybe most 16-year-olds.
sure.
Yeah, so that was late. I only got my first job, I believe, when I was 19. Yeah, I was 19.
Okay,
I think I'd just babysat once for a neighbor and like cleaned a house, like maybe 3, 4 months for another neighbor. And
okay, okay.
so,
So how did the conversation go when you decided that you wanted to get a job? Was it something you just went to your parents and said, "Hey, I think I should get a job"? Did they encourage you to do that? How did that work out?
so I think it's going to be a little bit more of a explanation here. So here's where there was this polarized, like there's this difference between my parents. My dad always said, like either you have a job or you're going to go to some sort of school. Like that was his.
Okay,
My
sure.
mom viewed it as this, no, you do something, but it doesn't have to be a career, it doesn't have to involve school. You just do something to fill in the time until you get married.
Okay. So
So
a different mentality between your mom and your dad for sure.
yeah, completely. And I will say that my dad was silent. Like he was just like, okay, like, you know, sure. But then he just went and did like his own, he had his own like work and world and, like, so it's predominantly my mom's messages that I heard very loud and clear
Okay.
because I, was at home. So the conversation about a job, and I will differentiate, I mean, think because we're talking about a job, not a career.
Right.
It was getting a job. It was sort of like, well, what do I want to do with myself? And it was sort of like, well, like I could go to college, but then we'd had discussions about that was not necessarily pointless, but it was sort of like, well, why would you spend a lot of money on something that you're not going to use in the end when you do stay at home?
Sure. Okay.
So the next best thing was maybe like beauty school. So my mom brought up beauty school, and then I just was like, okay, this is something that could allow me to uh, pursue like a job and like not a career, because it was never framed that way, but it was like you'll go to beauty school, you'll get a job as a beautician and work part time and then just make money on the side. And then eventually, once you get married, you can just like cut hair from home or, just quit. And that way the investment's pretty low. Um,
Okay. Okay. So would you say there were, because one of the things when I've been interviewing different people is they'll say there were some jobs, if you want to call it that, that um a woman would be allowed to have, like babysitting or maybe opening up an Etsy shop or cleaning a house or, like you're saying, going to beauty school. Did you feel like that was the case also? Like there was some forms of work that were approved and others where you're like, no, that's not as okay.
that was definitely the case. That was one of the reasons why I that's why my mom brought up the fact that beauty school is a great option, is because it's a very feminine environment. It's feminine because you're doing
Okay. Sure. Yeah.
hair or nails. You're not dealing with anything like, I guess, too masculine, maybe is another way of putting it.
Okay.
So
Right, right. That would kind of make sense, especially since there's probably not a lot of guys, at least back then, even like working
yeah,
in that field too.
yeah.
Um, okay, so walk me through the time. So you go and you've got a job at 19, um, but you're not pursuing a full career. What happened when you decided you were going to pursue a career?
So we're talking not so the beautician part or something else.
So so probably both. So
Okay.
you go, yeah,
All right. So at 18, I decide, okay, like, I got to do something. Like, I'm really ready to get out there and do something. So I go to,
sure.
so, and I actually go through the course. It was about half an hour from my home. I just got into my first car and just got my driver's license and started going. It
Oh yeah.
kind of,
Yeah.
I was like, oh my God. Um, and so I completed the course and then immediately started working at a salon near my home. It was like 3 minutes away.
Okay.
So I did that
Sure.
part-time for several months. And so that's the job part, that I consider the job. I'm 19 around this time, and my brother starts going to the local community college, and he takes an English class. And
Yeah.
I would like to do this. And so I start the class and I realize that this is more of a commitment than I have time for. So I quit, deciding to go back in the fall because this is winter quarter. And I made
Okay. Okay.
so that's sort of, so had it not been for my brother going, I don't think I would have ever gone, because I would have been like, no, this is a wasted, like I can't afford this or I can't do this. My brother is younger than me,
Right. Right.
a year and a half. And fast forward, I'm 20 by this time and I start college. Um,
Okay.
this is, I think, another difference perhaps than a lot of maybe stay-at-home daughters is that during this time my parents talk about divorce. So
Okay.
this is big because I think had it not been for this, I don't think my life would have, had it not been for my parents' divorce, I think I would have been a lot more maybe, I would have stuck with what I had been taught more, maybe, would have been raised, but I think that kind of acted
Okay.
as catalyst. And so I start, so they're talking about that. I'm 20, I start college, and because essentially we're so poor, we can get state aid to cover our college expenses and or my college.
Right, right.
And so I just work on completing my AA, and I kind of don't have like, I knew I wanted to, I took more English classes, knew I wanted to pursue that. So then I just completed my AA with a emphasis in English. And then during, of course, I by now I'd quit my job as a hairdresser and started working in the college library, but part-time is just
Okay.
hours a week. And that was later on, like, but it was still during the,
Right, right.
so, and then I completed it, like, I think when I was, gosh, 22, I think. So that's sort of
Okay.
that piece. I mean, I can continue on to like how I got to,
Yeah,
okay.
right.
Yeah. So,
So is are your parents at this point, like your mom particularly, because she sounds like the one that's more of the person believing these ideas. Is she at this point like nervous that you're doing this? Is she upset that you're doing this? Is she like, I can't, like, I don't care what she does right now because I'm working through this divorce? Or what's kind of her take on everything?
yeah. So she was, it was the latter piece. And it was this, she was trying to process her own like issues with the divorce. And so
Sure.
she was just really busy. And so it was like, college was like this really great place of just simply like, you know, kind of utilizing those classes of just emerging myself into them and learning a lot, which was really nice.
Okay.
I'd never had that.
Right.
So never had that kind of formal structured education part. So she just had a lot going on because she was a stay-at-home mom, and the limited amount of like job experience that she had was some sort of caretaking for my grandmother, so her mother, and that was it. Um, so she, yeah, so she was busy with that, and um, just kind of like working out what divorce meant for her and how she was going to
Okay.
provide for herself and us if we were to move in with her. So she wasn't,
Right. Okay.
so that's why I think again the story would have played out differently had it been,
Mm-hmm.
stayed together. And uh she so then I yeah so then I meanwhile I like pursue this, like I start pursuing English. Again, like my sibling went to a local university, like a public university, and so I went ahead and said, they have a pretty good English program.
Yeah.
And so I just went ahead and applied to several universities and got accepted, and then went and completed my BA. So, and at this point, I'm still sort of like not really, I kind of had an idea. I think it was junior year that I sort of had an idea of what I wanted to do, but, it's not really, some part of me still was like, oh, I should just wait, not make plans because I should get married. I think there was always that
Okay.
forth. So what I'm not highlighting here is the fact that the transition, a lot of my transition that began at the community college kind of just ended when I finished my degree because I knew that I couldn't stay home. Like I couldn't finish
Right.
waiting for someone to provide for me. Like that wasn't an option because so at that point I was living with my mom. I mean, she was barely breaking even, and my dad
Right. Right.
wealthy, like, we're always just we weren't well to do. And so I think I just sort of like saw my mom as an example of like what you should like what I could learn, like if the stay at home, to put it another way, what happens when staying at home as a daughter doesn't work out, then what do you do? And so that's
Right.
the breaking point for me was when I was, I think like around 24. It was this, okay, like I need to do something. If not, I will be poverty level. I won't, unless someone marries me, I'm not under the covering of my dad, but I'm not really under the covering of my mom, under my mom. And I think that's one thing that she had mentioned too was, I think at one point she sort of mentioned this, like, well, you're not under anyone's covering. And I remember kind of talking back a little bit and saying, well, it's not like you are, in theory, because you're not married. So who's under whose authority? And so it was during my junior year, I think, that I decided to attempt to go to law school. One of my cousins had was pursuing a similar trajectory, and I was like, well, I mean, he can do it. I can try and see, and if not, it was going to be it was good. I was planning to teach maybe like
Sure.
community college or high school, and it was more of a, well, let's just see what happens. Let me study for the entrance exam. Well, it's not the exam, it's like an the LSAT. And so I was like, well, if I get good enough score to get accepted into some schools, then we'll see. And it worked out. My score was good enough that I was able to go to the school that I wanted. And I think by that point, I think I was just, between the gap year I took after finishing my degree and starting law school, was the point where I kind of came to terms with being independent, with being,
Okay.
stop waiting, with, from moving from the me of 13, who's praying for her husband and under kind of like the parents and kind of being part of that family unit, to finally saying, well, maybe I can make these choices, or, maybe this is good for me. Again, it's a work in progress even now. So
Sure. Sure. So talk to me a little bit about the mentality. I think you hinted at it some, where it's like you wait for a husband and your life is almost like more of on hold, and you're like filling in this time rather than pursuing your life, as your own life. You're waiting for someone to kind of come in there and be your life. Is How would you have described that philosophy?
um I would honestly, I would describe that process and philosophy, and I don't know, this combination of ideas, something very archaic and something almost from ancient Roman times, when you used to have like the father handing off the daughter to the husband and the property along with the daughter. It seems that, and that, why I bring that up is because there's that for me, it's like the only transition really is from the household that you're born in and raised in to that of your husband. There's no in between. It's the wedding is the threshold into staying at home and being a daughter to staying at home and being a wife. There's no in between. Like this is right. This is how it should be. Like that's what you're taught, or that's what you hear. And it's almost anything outside of that is somehow like sinful. Um, it's as if it's like wrong and like decayed.
Right. Interesting. So, was there a like specific verses or a specific teacher that was mostly used, in your upbringing to promote that philosophy?
um My mom really used her life as an example and her history.
Okay.
And she had this specific verse that, or maybe it was something, I think this is more of a like paraphrase, but it's sort of like, this notion that like God created man so that he would, go and work on the field, and it kind of going back to Adam, like, with the sweat of your brow, and
Okay.
to women I give pangs in childbirth. And it's like that complete break between the public sphere of work and the private sphere of the home. So she used that as an example for her, and I heard that multiple times. As long as I've been like not alive but close. And
Sure.
when I want to say either 15 or 16, one of my mom's friends introduced a book called Created to be His Helpmeet by Debbie Pearl.
Oh, yeah.
So,
Oh, that was a big one. Yeah.
yeah, so I read that I think like twice.
And how old were you when you read it?
I want to say I was 15 or 16.
Oh man, dude, I read it about that same time, and there was actually some really scarring stuff in there. And it's
Oh,
like, what? Like, my mom probably didn't realize. She was just like, oh, it's a Christian marriage book, or I don't know what, but why I would be reading it at that age. But it was like you needed to prepare.
yeah.
Yeah, there was some stuff in there. Even now, I'm like, wow.
Yeah. So to be fair to my mom, she read through it. We talked about a lot about how there's three different types of men. I can't
Sure.
now. I know the last one was like a leader. Like,
Like
yeah, yeah,
a king,
yeah.
and a servant, I think, or something. Yeah.
Oh, steady was one of them.
Yes, yes, steady.
So that for some reason had, maybe it's because she took a lot of the ideas and just combined everything I'd heard growing up. And it was just, so that was like another big book. Um, to be fair to my mom, because I want to present a fair, side, there was something
Sure.
my mom didn't agree with. And
Right.
I think well, actually, maybe there's just one thing that she didn't agree with. I mean, I think she thought Debbie Pearl was maybe a little bit over that, like maybe a little went too far, but she agreed with everything else. I know there was one thing about when Debbie Pearl used this example about like, staying married to your husband even though he's looking at porn. It was along those lines. There's some story like that. My mom didn't agree with that. She's like,
Yeah.
well, you just like leave him at that point. But
Right. Like she's seeing that, yeah, that's not healthy.
like, yeah, but like the story, the part where Debbie Pearl talks about like those single women that are like feminists and so angry and upset at the world. Yeah, we that was just accepted. Like, oh,
Yeah.
like, you know what? Yeah, you're not happy to be single. You're not happy as a feminist. You're not happy pursuing a career. Like, the kids are neglected. Your husband can't eat because there's no dinner, and you're out working. Like, I stray now because this is more of the stay at home, but that book, why I bring that book up is because even though Debbie Pearl was specifically speaking to mothers and wives, that was the template. So, if you see
Right.
doing that, that's what you're gonna do. Like, so that was my training book of like, well, when I get married, I'm gonna cook, I'm gonna clean, I'm gonna like, cook, like do all these things and be frugal. And so staying at home was like your prep time, was where you learned the skills in order to do that. So that's why for me this like stay at home was very like it's like staying at home as a daughter just evolves into being stay at home as a wife, and that was how I was taught it.
Sure, sure. So at what point um did you personally, because I know you talked about how it was kind of a slow thing for you where you said, you know what, I don't think this is quite adding up. Like this doesn't make sense for me because I'm not married and I'm not getting married anytime soon. And so I do want to do some things and pursue a career. Um, did you have a moment where you kind of went and decided, okay, now Christianity, I don't want anything to do with Christianity anymore, or I still want something to do with Christianity, but this particular doctrine is just not what I believe to be correct?
So that's a little bit there was a point, but funny, that came a lot later. So, back up a little bit to religion and kind of churches that we went to. So we went to a variety of different churches growing up, but they were all pretty conservative, and
Sure.
some had homeschoolers, some didn't. Some had stay-at-home moms, some didn't. For a brief spell, we went to a church that had a lot more like family values, and so I
Okay.
like that was like more homeschooler base. All the women stayed at home, like no one worked, like all the girls stayed at home and were
Okay.
daughters. And then we quit going to that. But once the divorce was finalized, I somehow reconnected, and I started going there. My brother and my dad started going back to that church, and
Okay.
I've been part of that church for good like several years. I was part of that church for several years. Um, I so this is my way of saying, had it not been for belonging to a community that still upheld those standards of, okay, all the women stay at home, and the daughters stay at home till they're married, I think I would have broken away a lot faster. I think that break would have been probably, maybe when I was doing my completing sometime during my college years, let's grad. That being
Sure.
said, being part of that community kind of pushed things out further to where, it's only happened, it's more recent, like distinction, this break. I think why I went back is because of all the things I had heard, and this church was consistent with the values of staying at home, the values of homeschooling. Staying at home, I mean, like as a daughter until you get married, you know. Uh,
Right. Right.
and
So this church that you went back to, is this when you're in like law school or before that point?
before that point, so I started going to this church freshman year of college. Yeah, freshman year of college,
Okay.
the way through COVID. Last year was the last time. So through,
Oh, okay.
yeah, through
Sure.
everything almost. So yeah,
Okay, so pretty recent, really.
very recent. Yeah. So yeah, and
Okay. Okay. So how would you describe your, sorry, I think I lost you for a minute. How would you describe your like religious beliefs now? Do you still consider yourself to be a Christian? Are you still kind of like figuring that out?
so I am agnostic now. I have been for a good year, openly for a year. I think before that it was
Right.
I had been experiencing doubts, and I thought, no, this is gonna work. No, this is fine. I think for a year, not when I say openly, I just if someone asks, I say it. But I think during law school, I'd say, yeah, at the beginning of it, maybe I was still trying, and then I just kind of eventually said, nah, I can't. So now I'm just agnostic.
Sure. Okay. So would you say that that is, I don't know how to phrase this. Like, is it partly just because of like some of the beliefs that you were, kind of exposed to, or was it just something you think you would have come to anyway?
I think there would have been a less chance of my being agnostic had I been raised in a more open church and a more progressive church. Excuse me, one that tried
Mhm.
to look at the 21st century and then combine that with the teachings of what are in the Bible. Instead of saying, let's look at the Bible, let's take a lot of things and create lots of rigid rules and then place that in the 21st century. So I think my spiritual
Sure.
journey would have been different had I had less, I think, conservative and uh, black and white maybe rules saying this is the way you do it. Women don't do this. Daughters do this. Rather than, I think it would have been. I would have been part of it had there been a less distinction between us and the world and saying, well, we're just in it. This is how you interact, rather than removing, people and the church community out of that and saying, well, we have it right. and this is the way you're supposed to do it.
Right. Sure, sure. So let's talk. Okay, so I think we've covered a lot of topics. Just a few other ones that I thought might be interesting is emotionally, did you feel like you were prepared when you went out, into, I don't know how to phrase this differently, but like out into the world on your own? Or was it pretty easy to do the just, basic things like getting car insurance, buying a car, getting a house, or was that all kind of extra difficult because you had been, with your parents for so long and taught that a woman maybe shouldn't need to do those things?
So that was very difficult. So even I actually, I lived with my parents or my mom up through getting married, even though I was in law school.
Okay. Oh, funny. Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So I moved out for 1 year because it was closer to studying, but I commuted and lived at home. And because of that,
Okay.
I think
Okay.
I had a more like slow, broken down process and was like slightly
Hmm.
ready to engage with the world because I frankly don't think I was very well equipped. Um, I mean,
Sure.
uh, I remember driving out by myself, and I know it's a scary experience for everyone, but I mean, there's one point about driving things, and there's one thing about knowing that you don't have your family there, knowing that you're completely alone in the world.
Right.
That part was very scary. Um, like that's why when I went to beauty school, it was really difficult. It was my family wasn't there. I had no idea how to talk to people. I had no idea what basic idioms were, what um, you know, like certain, like dirty words. There was just I don't think I was very well equipped to engage this in mainstream American culture. I mean, I don't know who is, but I felt to some degree I felt more
Sure.
as people. And I think to some degree now I've embraced
Hmm.
that. But like getting, like you said, getting car insurance, I was like, I have no, like, I was under my mom's car insurance policy until my husband and I had ours. um yeah, like getting a car was easier. Like, even things like a cell phone. I mean, there's really no point in me having a cell phone. I think I had one briefly when I was 15, but my parents were like, you're not talking to anyone because, well, I'm at home. So really no, it's like, y'all were here. Um,
Sure.
and so I think I had a cell phone when I was 18, but it was mainly more for safety reasons. There again, like I didn't have like a ton of friends.
Right.
Even though I went to beauty school, I didn't make friends. It just the one thing I will go back to beauty schools is it felt very like me versus the world. I did not fit in with
Okay.
clients. Um, the teachers, the students, they were like from another planet. The word like the word spoke,
Yeah, sure.
their phrases, their lives. That they're like mentioning like boyfriends and cuss words and the party they went to, and some of them are 18, some of them are 25, and they're like, oh my god, like I don't have a boyfriend, I have never been to a party, and I have no idea what you guys are talking about. So
Yeah.
and that
Right. Right.
continued through college. I mean, it just did, and and law school. But it just that feeling though of feeling like you're from another planet when you're out on your own in the world has took me a really long time to get over, and even to some degree I still feel like that, but I think less so now since it's been like many years. But yeah, if there's one way to describe it, it's sort of like you're just left in the middle of nowhere with no tools and no water and no food, and you're just like, okay, how do I figure this out? Like, and I don't know, it's
Sure.
almost like you don't even start from zero. You start from like somewhere where it's worse, like a negative not a zero. It's like minus, whatever.
Right, right. Okay, so a couple other things. Let's talk about dating in this time. So you mentioned, when you went to beauty school, you didn't have a boyfriend, you hadn't been dating. Were you allowed to date? Did you date? And then how did you finally find your husband?
So we were not, we were allowed to, well, my both same standards applied to both my brother and I. So I was allowed to date at 18. They didn't call it courting, but essentially it was courting.
Okay.
And what I mean by this term is you're dating with intent. You're dating to get married. If this is not a suitable spouse, you're wasting your time and you're going to get tempted. I did not date at all. I didn't date. I think I went on a date when I was 21 for like, I went on 3 dates, and it was a coworker at the library where I was at the community college. It was her set me up with, so my coworker set me up. I was at that point where I was like, I don't think this is going to work out, is I just kind of wanted to see what maybe finishing my degree would be, because I was 21 and I was nearly done with my AA. So I said, well, if I do get married, but I don't know. And then I just, we didn't click. So maybe
Sure, sure. So it was a good, yeah.
I think had we clicked, again, maybe things would have worked out and I probably would have never completed my BA, but I don't know, that's it just,
Yeah, yeah.
um, it was really hard to put myself out there. That was not something I was taught. I was taught to be submissive, to wait, you're always waiting. For me, my experience has always been waiting, like I always waited on my parents to act, then to do something that influenced my life. And then so I would always have to wait for my husband to come show up on the scene. I
Sure.
didn't date anyone, I think, till my now husband asked me out. He was
Okay.
part of the church that I was going on during that time.
Sure.
I started going back during my freshman year of college. And so he was sort of like a family friend-ish, I guess.
Okay.
Done
Yeah.
things like, hung out as friends and like with some of the church group. And yeah, and then we got married, like I think a couple of years later. But yeah, so that's sort
Yeah.
of, so he was part of someone who was um, familiar with that, as in, homeschooled and part of that community.
Right. Right. So, I think I've just got like one last question. Um, what would you say to someone who is either in this movement or maybe a mom or parent who's considering like raising their kids with these ideas or these philosophies?
I would, I would, I have a lot to say.
Sure.
The most powerful thing that I can say is the this system of having a daughter stay at home worked in a pre-industrial revolution era, when
Hmm.
society was made up of, a lot of America, at least here in America, a lot of people were farmers. Not everyone lived in the city. Not everyone, was the top 3%. In a pre-industrial revolution, this mode would have worked because this is what everyone did. Now, trying to take that lifestyle and idealize it and say, no, no, this is the perfect way to live life in the 21st century, I think is problematic, because our structures have changed. Our economy has changed in the last, 200 years. And I would probably end this short, my thoughts on, raising someone to be a stay-at-home daughter. I would end it with a question of what happens when, the dad dies, what happens when the husband dies, what happens if you're divorced? What happens, and again, it's always the what ifs, but why you would willingly, I think, cut resources is baffling, I think. And I think there's many, if you want to pursue that lifestyle, I think there's healthier ways of doing that than just simply creating this isolated structure and then saying this is the only way it is. When I think there's a lot of people, and there's a lot of people in the US are not doing that right now. We live in a different economy. We live in a different world than this system is trying to emulate, which is hundreds of years ago.
Sure, sure. Cool. Well, very interesting. It was great talking to you. Do you have anything to add that I didn't like cover?
um I don't know. There's always like a lot. Like this is just one of those subjects. I think for me, and I think why I reached out to you was I heard about this and I didn't know there was a term, and finding the term was
Sure.
like, oh my God, this is good. We can talk about it. We have a term. The only thing I would have to add is this, for some reason it kind of conflates with purity culture, and that's a whole different discussion. But
Right.
I would just, be curious to see what, to what degree this is just kind of like combines the purity culture to stay-at-home daughter movement. But I think it's a whole different discussion. But it'd be really interesting.
Right. Right. I would say like from the people I've interviewed, I don't want to like label people, but I would say almost all of them were into the purity culture also. Like if you were a stay-at-home daughter, you were kind of a part of the purity culture. Now, I don't think everyone that was a part of the purity culture was a stay-at-home daughter. Like that seems like where there was a break at times. But yeah, I would definitely say like the stay-at-home daughter movement went hand in hand with the purity culture because it made sense to kind of work with with that for sure. But it wasn't like everybody because some people still did the dating thing. But it definitely was pretty strong in the movement for sure.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of like my
Okay.
like like my acquaintances, friends, circles are pretty like it's always been hand in hand. But
Right, right.
I think that's why I keep going. I keep hinting at this, stay-at-home daughter, stay-at-home wife. It's very hard in my mind to differentiate between the two because being a stay-at-home daughter immediately went hand in hand with you will become a stay-at-home wife. And so that's why for me,
Right. Like it wasn't a choice. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, and then not to say if I had never gotten married and never pursued anything, I probably still would be with my mom or my parents had they not gotten divorced.
Sure.
But yeah.
Sure, sure. Interesting, interesting. Okay. Sounds good. Well, thank you so much, Ruth, for your time. This was really fun to talk to you. And I wish we had like 2 or 3 hours because I feel like we could just keep going.
No, I know. I know.
Yeah, yeah. But I hope you follow along and yeah, just keep connecting because I think it's really been helpful, I hope, for people to be able to just talk about their story and the way that they were taught and how that affected them and their thoughts on it, I think is super beneficial. So hopefully it's been a good experience for you too.
Yeah, it definitely has been.